Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of my podcast series, Interviews with Educators, where my guest for this series is Miss Megan Vosk. Megan is an international educator who has lived and taught in multiple countries, including the US, UAE, South Korea, India, and Laos. Megan cares deeply about how students experience belonging, and her work is focused on multilingual learning, community engagement models, and the ways that classroom teachers can actively shape their school culture. Megan currently teaches in Vientiane in the middle years program and also serves in coordination roles connected to service learning and language acquisition. And if you didn't already know, hello, I'm Christina Kottman. I'm a former elementary teacher who taught in international schools for a decade, and now I work with school leaders to focus on teacher retention, onboarding practices, and overall communications. Through this podcast, my aim is to uncover and share what's already working in education and bring you the stories of educators whose experiences, insights, and wisdom can help shape your journey as an educator. So, let's jump in. Welcome, Miss Megan.
Thank you for having me, Christina. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. I have missed you, friend, because we were working together in a school in Delhi, and it's been a long time since I've seen you, but you have been up to some amazing things, right?
Well, yeah, I've been busy, but it does seem like so long ago that we were in India. It was like a lifetime
Yeah.
ago, right before COVID.
Yeah, I know. Well, now you're working in a school in Laos. So,
hmm
can you tell me more about what you're doing with plants? Because there was an amazing article that you put together about the power of plants and this elective that has been structured around an experience that you had with learners. So, tell us more about that.
So I think the piece you're referring to is the one in Rethinking Schools magazine, and I talked about a school gardening project that I did, and I spent a lot of time learning from experts about plant medicine here in Laos and trying to learn a little bit more about what the locals do in terms of like using herbs and plants to treat various illnesses and also for preventative medicine. So it kind of deepened my understanding of traditional medicine and how it can be used in conjunction maybe with more like a Western medicine or modern medicine. So kind of trying to see the value of both.
Yeah, that was an interesting part of the article. When I read it, I was thinking about how you framed some of the questions to help the students understand that there's not a if or this that. There's no binary to understanding the knowledge that we get from our world. So, what were the students bringing to you in those conversations?
Yeah, so in this project, I think we kind of got inspired when we saw the garden that the cooks used, like next to the cafeteria. So a lot of the cooks use like local, like mint and coriander in their cooking and like their personal cooking, and then also like in the food that they prepare for the students. So we kind of were inspired by that to kind of look and see like, oh, what are like the local people here have a lot of deep knowledge about the different plants in their environment, like much more than than my American self did. So like there was a lot that we could learn. The students were really interested in medicinal properties of some of the medicines, especially when it came to making tea.
Yeah, there was an activity that you guys did where you went to a farmer's market or like a public market and
Yeah.
found out about the sellers who were actually providing these different herbal options.
Yeah, it was really interesting actually because in the West also we tend to value like the leaf and the flower, and a lot of the plants that we saw like there's more value placed on the root and like some of the parts of the like the bark and like some of the parts of the plant that like are not as like visually appealing or that you don't see, but they do a lot with like boiling roots and making like poultices and kind of like making little pastes with things. Especially like a lot of people at the market are Hmong ethnicity, so they come from like the mountain areas in northern Laos, and they also have very deep knowledge of plant medicine because they live so far from like modern hospitals and doctors, and so they have to kind of rely on their own knowledge to treat various illnesses and things.
Yeah, I remember reading that there was an experience that the students said really stuck with them. And I think that really points us to this idea that memorable learning is not necessarily happening in a classroom where there's lots of rigor and lots of content. Can you
Mm-hmm.
expand on that for anyone who's listening who might be curious about how to slow down their teaching and all of the pressure that's on students nowadays?
Yeah, I think a lot of teachers in international schools would be familiar with like Week Without Walls or experiential learning trips. So when we went on our grade 9 experiential learning trip, we go into the countryside of northern Laos around Luang Prabang. And so when we were hiking through the forest there, like on a day hike, the local guide who was also Hmong, he was showing us some different plants, and he pointed out one that you could use it to tell whether or not you have dengue fever. So you said, like, if you rubbed a little bit of this plant on you, like if you have a reaction, it means that you have dengue. But if you don't have a reaction, it means that you don't. So like they could use that to figure out, I guess, whether or not to give other types of herbs to treat it, because maybe um like with dengue, like for example, you can't take Advil, but you can take some other stuff. So maybe it's to help kind of decide how to treat whatever kind of fever the person has.
Mm-hmm.
But the students were fascinated. They all wanted to try it. So we were taking a little water break, and it turned into like an hour. Like it's like, I want to try the plant. Like I want to see, but like, I mean, to me, everything just looks kind of the same out there. Like it's hard to distinguish one from the other. But
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes clear that like some people have much deeper knowledge, and they can actually differentiate between the different types of plants that are in the woods, rather than it all just looking kind of like green mess.
Yeah. And you brought up the idea of plant blindness, which I think is probably
Yeah.
a new term for many folks.
Yeah, I heard that term when I was in Delhi, actually, when I did the Sangha group. One of the members of the Sangha group had talked about that when we were doing like a meditation, and he was saying like so many people have this plant blindness that they don't even notice like the plants around them or the green things, because we're so used to just going from building to building, or from like man-made space to man-made space, that we like kind of just totally tuned out the natural spaces. And I was thinking like, oh yeah, I have that too. Because remember, some of the science teachers in Delhi were always like going around the campus and like looking at like, here's this beautiful bonsai tree, and like here's this beautiful neem tree, and here's the eucalyptus tree, and here's like blooming jet. Like in our campus was like a garden, right, basically. So I realized, oh, that teacher was like noticing a lot more stuff than I was. Like I was just going from like the library to the middle school building to the assembly hall, and I wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, you think about how in Western societies we often know about aloe vera, because if you have a sunburn, you can get an aloe vera plant in your home, cut it off, and then immediately have that soothing tropical ointment. But
Yeah.
otherwise, you're like, poison ivy. That's all I know.
Yeah, and like poison oak, right? Like when you're like when
Mm.
I'm home in the summer and I'm in the woods, like in Pennsylvania, like my friends are always pointing out, like, oh, watch out for that tree over there. But here, I think it's much more like woven into people's lives. Like a lot of people use like the tiger balm, which is kind of like an herbal mentholated thing to like treat bug bites. And sometimes the students have like little inhalers that they put in their nose, and they say it like wakes them up or makes them feel a little bit more like they can focus. And then like when people get headaches here, they go to the nurse, and the nurse gives them these little strips that have like medicated, I think like eucalyptus maybe, and it like gives a little like shot of the eucalyptus into your temple.
Mm.
So it's much more pervasive, I think, in the culture, this idea of like, oh, we can use different like herbs and smells to kind of make us feel more awake or to help treat pain or illness.
And it kind of brings out the student's own background knowledge, because if they have any understanding of medicines or plants from their own culture, you're giving a space for that knowledge to be recognized alongside, the basic content subjects, math, science, literacy. And I'm curious about how you set up the elective, the power of plants, because in an IB curriculum, there's opportunities, but sometimes teachers are hesitant to actually go forward with an idea.
I think it depends too on the structure of the school. Like my school is really small, and so it's easy to like be very responsive. And we have like a Wednesday schedule that's like there's no like regular classes on the Wednesday. So like the students in the morning have a 2-hour elective block. And like those are ones that the teachers design. So they're called like immersion activities. And so the Power Plants was an idea for an immersion. But the DP coordinator, the MYP DP coordinator, and I had like planned together, because I'm also the service learning coordinator. We had planned together to do a round of the immersions where they were just totally focused on SDGs. So like we would offer like 10 different immersions, and each one was focused on a different SDG. So like there was one on gender equity, there was one on language equity, there was one on like fast fashion or like upcycling. So there was all sorts of different. There was one on water and like clean access to clean water, and so the one I offered was the one on plants, and we tied it to SDG 3, good health and well being.
That's really interesting. And I think it
Yeah.
must also take some of your willingness to say, I'm not sure about this, but I'm curious to learn more. And because you're in a context that allows you to create these self directed learning experiences, you're able to
Yeah.
also facilitate your own learning experience.
Yeah, that's actually because I was interested in it. And there's this beautiful woman on campus that I mentioned in my article is kind of like a mentor to me. And I would always see her around campus, like putting eggshells in like different flower beds. And like she had done some work with one of the science classes and helping the students identify the different trees. So I asked her to help me, like, could she help me set up this little garden behind the classroom because I was quite interested and I saw there was this totally unused area. And one of the students had told me, "Oh yeah, we used to have a green team and we used to do plant propagating, but like that teacher left, but like we used to do it over there." And I could see like, oh, there was like someone had done a little gardening. So I thought, oh, we can revive that.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up the idea that when a teacher leaves, a good idea also leaves. And I think international
Yeah.
schools are probably the most vulnerable to that happening.
Yeah, what do they call that? Like the suitcase curriculum or like a
Hmm.
backpack curriculum? And it's not, yeah, well, I've been talking about that a lot also with the MYPDP coordinator. Like, how do we make these things more sustainable so that it's not just like, subject to the whims of who's there? And I think sometimes we feel like, well, we have to offer something new to students every year. But like this year, we're going to do the same thing and offer this round of SDG themed immersions. And we're going to do it like leading up to Earth Day. And then on Earth Day, we'll have a big like student summit where the students will all share what they learned.
Wow, it's so creative. And it's wonderful to work at a school that really supports that teacher leadership, right? Because I can imagine that someone listening might be feeling like, that's amazing for you. You have all these resources and all this opportunity. What could I possibly do in my school, in, for example, my home state, Virginia, if they realize that plant blindness is happening with their students and students are feeling this pressure for standardized exams, for example?
Yeah.
How do we understand like time, place, the curiosity element of helping students go beyond like what is classroom knowledge and what is life knowledge?
Well, there's so many curriculum ties to like, for example, like science, like what are the different plants and animals around you. Like we had a woman come in and she talked about using dichotomous key to like help you identify what the different kinds of plants are, or it ties to social studies because you're thinking about people's cultures, people's traditions, or what kind of foods did people prepare based on what they had, or how did that knowledge get passed down. I think there's real ties to English language arts classes because you can read books about like that Seed Folks book, right? It talks about like these kids that come together to build a community garden and adults in the community that help build the garden. So I think the curricular ties are super rich. I remember in India, we did a schoolyard safari on Earth Day, like as a grade 7 team. And we like invited the grade 2s and 3s. And so the students had been studying in science class, what are the different plants and animals that you can find around the campus. And they led the grade 2s and 3s on a little tour and pointed out like, this is the blank tree, this is the this tree. And they'd put like a little QR code on some different plants and trees around the campus so the kids could scan it and like find out more about that tree. And then they did like little activities where they sketched it. So it doesn't matter like if you in Virginia or Delhi or Vientiane because there's going to be plants outside, right, that you can look at and see, what are the local plants there. And even after I wrote that article, when I was at home over the summer in like my friend's house in Pennsylvania, like she showed me her garden and she showed me all the things that she had back there. And I was like, oh, you can make tea from this one. She also had a lot of lavender and mint. And like if you've got rosemary, you can use it in your chicken. So it's very easy to use the different plants and herbs.
And it also makes me think that the curiosity of an individual teacher can be cemented into the curriculum options because your curiosity about plants has now become a whole elective. And you built it around this idea that, like, we don't know everything about the place that we're currently living in. Let's find out. Let's be curious about it. Let's go explore what the local knowledge is. And I love that you took it upon yourself to figure out who could I talk to in the school who already does feel like they're more of an expert than I am. Because sometimes we're
I know
tempted.
hardly anything. I know almost nothing about like I know almost nothing about the place where I live in, and I knew almost nothing about plants. And like a lot of people have a lot of very deep knowledge, way more than me.
Exactly. And you brought in the school nurse, who I think a lot of people would,
Yes.
would understand, like, definitely knows her medical science, but plants? that's an interesting connection.
Yeah, so actually a couple times I'd gone in there and I told her I wasn't feeling good, and she told me like, "Oh, just get some ginger tea." And she was like, "You don't need to take like medicine." And then she told me like that she has this huge garden behind her house, and she'd like hardly ever given her kids like a painkiller, like a Tylenol or like antibiotic, because she'd just given them the different kinds of plants and herbs in her garden. And she told us about the moringa plant, which is like a interesting plant that they give to HIV people who have HIV, like in developing countries, because it like helps boost your immune system. And she was telling me, oh, you can sprinkle it on an omelet. And so I just kept going into her office and asking her more and more. And finally, she's like, do you want me to come? I said, yeah, I want you to come talk to students. And when she came, she brought so many different things for the kids to try. It was great. Yeah. And she said, look, this is what I used to make the tea. And like, here's some lemongrass. And this stuff is all from my garden. So as I felt like I started to see her more than just a nurse, she's like, I learned so much more about her.
Yeah, I think it's so important in international schools because we have such a various population. People come and go, and some people have been there for years and years and are much more embedded into the community. And I know later on, as we keep going through the podcast, we're going to talk a lot about community engagement, but I want to kind of double click on the student experience, because there were a lot of great questions and understanding about how to slow down the learning, to actually be in a garden, listen to an expert who the students might not have seen as an expert, the school cafeteria staff, the nurse that they go to when they're sick.
Yeah, and we also did have an expert come from the local university, and she was like the head of the Department of Traditional Medicine. So it's also very important in Lao culture. And so they have a department in their university. And she told us that it's becoming much more popular in the West. And so they're getting visiting scholars. Like she said, they had a group from France that came and they wanted to learn about like plant medicine in Lao. And she told us about her work with guava, and that she had found out that guava actually was also quite good for treating things like dengue, and like had lots of different properties in the root, and that there is so much more to be discovered. So actually they have even like a biodiversity forest somewhere outside the city where they're trying to protect all of these kind of native plants and make sure that they don't get cut down due to deforestation or logging or mining activities.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think immediately of the Amazon here in Brazil, where there's constantly the threat of, is this forest going to sustain itself? Are we damaging it beyond repair? And also, of course, what we always teach students, there's 1,000 species living in the Amazon that we probably have never even encountered. And they could have cures, they could have potential for, immunoboosting, but also like longevity.
And my friend that I referred you to, that I wanted you to interview, also he's doing a lot of work with acai berry plant and like using them for water purification, like some like the not like the refuse part of the fruit. Like after, I think you can use that kind of to help clean like polluted waterways. So he leads like a biology club and a science club, and like he's done a lot of work with plants too, and trying to think about how plants can be used to like restore the environment. So when you talk to him, you can also, because he kind of inspired me too. I was like, oh, there's lots of people in, like you said, place and time. Like there's lots of people in different contexts that are doing kind of similar things. And then you feel like, oh, like I'm not alone. Like actually, like, there's like a ton of other people that are also interested in this kind of thing.
I know, and that's the fabulous thing about talking to other educators, because we all have these great ideas that we want other people to know about. Thinking about the acai berry, it also reminds me of an article that I was reading about how the cocoa plant that makes chocolate, they're trying to figure out ways to reutilize the bark, the kind of husk, to be kind of a new plastic. Because, in Mexico, they're trying to do stuff where avocado seeds can become cutlery and plates. Oh, cool. And this was a similar initiative to figure out what can we do with the cocoa itself.
So also on our grade 9 experiential learning trip, we go to a local coffee plantation and we learn about how they make coffee, which is like actually one of like a really big product in Laos, like one of their, like, I think they export a lot of coffee, and it's like a completely sustainable coffee farm. And so they also use the refuse from the coffee, like they sell it to different organizations as compost, and then they use other parts of the coffee plant to make tea because they also didn't want to have any waste, so it's like zero waste coffee.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many amazing things happening. I mean, that's a big part of my channel here on YouTube, is just talking about what's already working in education. Because if we have conversations like this with each other, it might spark an idea, even just to have a community garden at the school, or to figure out if someone's grandparent has knowledge about plant science and medicine that they might be able to bring in. Or we could go on a field trip, perhaps, to a local space that does more agricultural work. And it becomes this opportunity for the students to expand their learning beyond the classroom walls.
Yeah, one of the students brought in these like little packets of turmeric that she'd had in her house, and she said, "This is my mom's turmeric from China, and like she uses this for tea." And so we also had that when we had our tea ceremony. And another student had brought in, I think from Korea, like a box of rose hip tea, and they were like big like rose pet flowers, like bulbs that you could kind of put in the tea too. That was
Wow.
exciting because you're right, the students get excited too, and then they want to also share and bring stuff from their home or their culture.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about the multilingual learners, because in international context, whether it's a school or just our communities nowadays, we have learners who have all of this background knowledge of their culture, different languages, and sometimes in a traditional school setting, we don't have opportunities to share. So what did you see with the multilingual learners in your space while you were working on this project?
I think it's that gardening is very hands-on. And you can do a lot of it non-verbally, right? Like you can go out and water, you can check the plant, you can work with somebody else to kind of dig a hole or fill the ground with soil. These are all things that you can do without using much language. So the students that were maybe beginning English language learners, they could participate more fully, I think, because it was very hands-on, it was very essential, and it was very like you watch someone do something and then you do what they do, right? So it kind of allowed them to participate more. When we prepared like our tea, like everyone had a different role, and some kids helped to like chop up the mint and things, and other kids were plucking the leaves, and some kids were making signs, and other kids were making like a matching game, and other kids wanted to present. So like there was lots of different kinds of roles that students could have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they probably felt more of a sense of belonging in that classroom environment because of the ability to share aspects of their own lives.
Yeah, I think so. And even this year, we still have the garden going. And like this year, we tried something kind of interesting. Is that the woman that I'm working with wanted us to try growing like pumpkin in laundry baskets. So we got like big plastic laundry baskets and filled them with soil, and we planted the pumpkin in them because she said, "Oh, we can move this easily, and it'll be it'll be it's like a kind of a good size, and it's got holes in it for aeration." So now we're growing pumpkin in laundry baskets. And so the kids also go out there, and now one of the students for their personal project wanted to learn how to plant marigolds. So she's come back with me and my colleague, and she's looked at the garden, and we talked to her about it. So what they say, like from one seed, like things bloom. I guess it's kind of on the nose, but
No, it's perfect.
yeah.
I mean, the marigold example even makes me think that that's great entrepreneurship instincts, because marigolds are used in many different ceremonies around Southeast Asia. So if you knew how to grow marigolds, you could potentially create a floral business and potentially contribute even more to your community.
Yeah, and here also they sell the marigolds for offerings for Buddhist ceremonies. So always outside the temple, there's a woman selling like marigold tower and like bunches of bananas.
Yeah. Now, it makes me think that in the US, there's always beautiful heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market, right?
Yeah.
And I can think of so many students that I worked with at my university who probably would love to understand, how can I make really giant, juicy tomatoes? Because I love those in the summertime.
Yeah. And actually, like, even there was like other teachers that came by, and like one other teacher was like, "Oh, like I used to study like plants, and like you you didn't put any like nitrogen fixing, you put all like nitrogen leaching plants back there, so like you should have planted some beans because now your soil's going to be bad." Like just like random people, or like another woman came up and was like, "Oh, I have a lot of moringa seeds in my garden." Like then she brought me some, so it was like kind of actually back to the marigold though. It made me think of in that cult of pedagogy, she had that article like "Find Your Marigolds," right? So it's also like a metaphor for like the goodness in a community.
Yeah. And it just makes me think about community wellness as well. You know, having a space that is green and is kind of sharing that metaphor of you plant the seed, it's not going to sprout overnight. We need patience and time and care. I think there was
Yeah.
a great quote in your article from a student talking about how the garden taught them that there's an idea that patience is really important as a learner.
Yeah. Yeah, that was so beautiful. And he said, like, if you can't overwater it and you can't underwater it, so like you really have to pay attention and find like the right balance. Because like if you do it in a rush and do it too fast, you could do too much. And if you forget, then you're not going to do it at all. So like you have to be conscious and like intentional and really like pay attention to the plan.
Yeah. It makes me even think about the multilingual learners because in our next episode, we're going to talk about
Mm.
language policies. And often schools say there's one way to do this. You know, this amount of water, this amount of sunlight, right? For a
Yeah.
student, it's this amount of English, this amount of instruction in the classroom or out of the classroom. So, in our next episode, let's dive into language. But to wrap up this one, is there anything else you would tell that teacher who's like, I love the garden idea, I'm going to start this? Maybe something that would help them speak to their leadership or to their colleagues?
Sure. Like maybe it's just a matter of looking for some space in your school environment where maybe it's like a little bit underused or neglected, and you can share like I have an idea to make the space a little better. And it's very cheap. So I think the administrators are likely to approve it because you don't really need much. Like the seeds hardly cost anything and the soil is already there, you just kind of need to prep it a little bit. So it's not that hard, I think, to convince people you want to do it because it'll make the environment look nicer and it's not very expensive.
Exactly.
It doesn't
And
take that much time.
no, it doesn't. And I think that there's also this feeling on a teacher that I'm going to become responsible for this. But in your experience, the students kind of come and show up and say, I would like to take care of the garden today. This is a way that I want to connect to my community. This is a way that I want to process whatever's happening and kind of self regulate through the garden.
Yeah, and I think if a teacher has passion for something, like that also will shine through to administrators and to students. And so people will be more likely to support you because they see like, oh, you're really motivated to do it. And there's so much research out there on the benefits of community gardens, right? I think you'd be hard pressed to find something less like critical or saying like, oh, this is a bad, like no one's gonna say it's a bad thing to be growing, tomatoes. It's hard to see the cost.
Yeah, and in the description below, I'll link Megan's article about the power of plants, the elective that she created at her school, and any other resources about how you might start a community garden at your school. Thank you for joining us. We're on to episode 2, where we're going to talk about multilingual learners, language policies, and what schools can do to support multilingual experiences. So we'll see you there.
Thank you, Christina.